this morning, and thanks for this invitation to spend some time with you. This is my I'm ending 40 years at the University of Washington this year, and so I have this kind of track record of various kinds, thinking about finance, especially the last 3.5 years as Provost and Chief Executive Vice President. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about our fiscal environment and the importance of everybody having an active role in the financial decisions that we make. This is sort of the modern university, and I don't need to tell you this, I think you know it, but that if we're going to be successful in maintaining excellence, we really actually have to think about fiscal sustainability. And that, I think of, academic excellence is 1.0 and fiscal sustainability is 1.1. And you can't do the first one if you don't have the second one. And so given the reality of the world that we live in, that leads to a series of choices that we have to make. Ruth suggested that I might start with a kind of a broad overview, and I don't know what is the right broad overview, but I don't know, it came to me at one point over the weekend, the beginning of Charles Dickens' Tales of Two Cities. I didn't like the book. When I had to read it in high school, it just seemed like a very long book, and I haven't revisited it, but it does begin, as you may remember, if you too had to suffer through it, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And we are in the best of times. We have opportunities that are truly exciting, I think real game changers in the things that we can do in terms of technology, innovation, in research, in student success. We know how to create programs that have real impact for our students, that can change lives, and we can do it to scale. So that's all pretty wonderful. We have retention programs. You have some remarkable programs of people in the community. All of those are really, truly exciting, and actually the students benefit enormously from it. And you've also created an environment here where faculty can do their work and staff can do their work too in supporting the broad mission. That's the best of time. The worst of time, this is public higher education, and this is not the best of times in public higher education. Even though we can do all those cool things, and you know this, the amount of money we have is finite. There's just so much. There are not extra bags of money anywhere. Anna Mari and I teased a little bit about hunting for the bags of money in our offices, but there aren't any. And so that means you have to pick between X or Y or A or B or whatever the right number is. And if you do that, you're not going to be able to do that. It's the same kind of thing that you do in your homes, in your own personal budgets. If you spend so much money on a trip or a car or a new dishwasher or a new furnace, that means you don't have that money for something else. This has always been something we needed to think about. How you spend the public's money, I think, is extremely important. I think it becomes even more so when about 65 or 70% of that public money comes from tuition dollars from our students. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have been paying attention more to it, but I think it just really heightens the sense of the accountability that we have, and how we think about money, and then how we spend it. There are a huge variety of demands on our money, all those things that I mentioned in the best of times. And then there's a whole bunch of things that don't seem very cool, but that require us to spend some money. A lot of infrastructure, and some of you I know are here from infrastructure units. Part of my research got me interested in 20 years ago in infrastructure, and I understand how important it is, but it's not really very sexy or exciting to think about a new HR system or a new finance system, unless you actually are stressed day by day in terms of our older system. It's a little bit like, when your washer, your dryer dies, and you've been used to be able to wash your clothes and dry your clothes at home, and you have to spend a bunch of money for the new one, and you're kind of just back to where you were. I mean, it doesn't seem like, this was cool. I got to take a great trip, or I have a shiny new car. You've got a new washer and a dryer. Very functional, okay? Very functional, extremely important. You can't do a lot of things without it, but in an analogy, it's not like a sexy, new, exciting, scintillating kind of thing. So thinking about these things, the lack of money, how we spend it, has been a particularly big part of my job over the last 3.5 years as the provost. I'm the university's chief academic officer, but I'm also the chief budget officer. And I think those things are important to put together because our chief mission, of course, is, and I'm repeating myself on some of this, is to actually have that sense of academic excellence. That's where we start. That's what we are proud of. That's what draws great faculty to our university. That's what benefits our students. But you actually have to be able to pay for it in the day. I didn't always have to think about money, especially early in my career on the University of Washington faculty. Now, part of that was that there seemed to be more money in those days, and we weren't actually drawing as much of a proportion of our discretionary budgets or instructional budgets from student tuition dollars. I really began thinking about budgets primarily when I became a department chair in 2002. And I want to talk about that just for a minute, because this is a little bit about my journey. But the singular focus I had was how much money did we have in the department, and then how much money could I pry out of the College of Arts and Sciences at University of Washington. And I had a little sense of the college's financial limitations. They had a lot more money than the department had, so of course they should give it to me. Now, the fact that I was the chair of one of 40 departments in the College of Arts and Sciences really wasn't something that I spent a lot of time thinking about. My job was to be an advocate for us, and because what we were doing was pretty phenomenal. And I really think, in hindsight, I had really no sense of the broader university. I mean, I didn't engage with the university itself at that point. I mostly dealt with the divisional dean for social sciences. There were 14 units in social sciences, and my job was to pry positions and things out of them. So I didn't really understand the college's perspective. And there's some irony, because much of my job is trying to say to people, yes, but today, it's a much bigger sort of thing. There are, 16, 17 schools and colleges. We have 3 campuses, that kind of thing. So now I think of myself sometimes talking to myself from 30 years ago, saying, well, no, actually, it's not quite as simple as you might think it is. There are some things that I did know then. One was that I did understand the zero-sum aspects of money, that if you spend money on something, you don't have it to spend on something else. And I also thought of money as a tool. So having money isn't just cool to have, it's because you can do things with it. And so that kind of utilitarian notion of money, I think, set me well up for later having to contemplate how do you think about priorities, because if money is a tool, then it's the thing that you use to reach where you want to go. I really began thinking a lot more seriously about budgets when I became dean of the graduate school for the university in 2008. I was there for 4 years. And I walked in the door in the fall of 2008, and about 3 months later, the bottom fell out. It was a very painful introduction to budgeting, and it wasn't budgeting 101, it became sort of budgeting 5006, because we were way advanced, and also to the broader context of the University of Washington. We had a great reduction in our state appropriation at that time, and at the graduate school, we had about a 16% cut in our overall budget. And that's pretty sobering, because we weren't fat. We were not sort of just living life big. So what we had to do was we had to prioritize. We had to talk about, so what's the most important things that we do? And how do we decide what those are? And so that prioritization, that setting of goals, which was a collective process that the staff was engaged in that with campus partners as well. And it's healthy to have that kind of conversation. It's not much fun, though, when you actually are going to have to cut things, when you're going to have to lay off some people because there just simply isn't money for them. And it also asks you to sort of look deeply and sort of say, what's the most important thing that we do here? What we did was, we said, we're going to focus on graduate education and graduate students. And so there were some really great things that the graduate school did then that I had benefited from before I got to the graduate school that we eliminated. So we had an international travel fund for faculty going to conferences to present their research. Really great, but I didn't say the word graduate in any of that, did I? Graduate student was not part of it. It was faculty going to present their papers. And it wasn't joint authors, it was just the faculty going. We also had a wonderful program in which when faculty were trying to get a book published in the university press, we would provide subventions. We would provide, many university presses want you to have somebody with a grant or something like that to support some of the costs of publishing. We eliminated that. Again, it wasn't for graduate students. And so those were, am I happy we eliminated them? No, not at all. That was very painful. I benefited from the travel. I knew how important it was. But if we had to pick between the graduate students, which is core to our mission, and the staff went through that, then we had to make those kinds of, and we had to be kind of aware of the trade-offs as we went ahead. I also got, in a broader sense at this time, involved with university issues. At the sort of 2009, 2010, then Provost Phyllis Wise began something which you may have heard of, called 2 years to 2 decades. How many of you have actually heard of that phrase? And then people kind of make fun of it, calling it, it was 2Y, 2D, and then so people started calling it 2D, R2D2 kind of things, you know, like little play on the movies. But the idea of that was that any decision you make about finances right now, in the next 2 years or so, because we had a significant drop in state funding, we were going to do a lot of cuts, needed to be in the perspective of the next 20 years. Where do you want to be in 20 years? And so don't cut stuff just because it's there and it's easy to lop off. What are your values? And again, this talked a lot about priorities. What do you cut? What do you redeploy? How do you proceed? But always with an eye to your mission. So, you know, at the time I remember some people talked about this as an example of the corporatization of the institution. I think it's just the opposite. It was about academic excellence. How do we do the things that what is it that we most need to do? I mean, you've seen this. It's easy to, you know, take on new things. And so there's kind of creep. You have more things, and they're all kind of cool, and you never stop old things. And having a conversation about, are there some things we should quit doing? Or are there some new things we need to do? I think those are important conversations. And for us, it was economic constraints that forced us, I think, to really do a lot of that. The graduate school experience set me well up for moving to Gerberding in 2012. I've served there 6 years. I was Senior Vice Provost for Academic and Student Affairs, and then as Provost. And as Provost, I work closely with the deans and the chancellors on everything and anything having to do with academics and budgets. And so all budgets come through my office. That's true for the vice presidents as well. Just as we were going through the transition in March of 15, I remember Anna Mari saying to me that in the first week or so, I would think, oh my God, we've got a lot of money. And within a week or two, I'd realized that it was about a third of what we actually needed. So it might look like it was certainly, you know, bigger than any budget I had seen anyplace else, but, you know, given the demands on it and the things that you could predict who were coming and the deferred maintenance and need for infrastructure projects and things like that, nowhere near enough money. So back to what I talked about in terms of the graduate school, what do you prioritize? What are the most important things for you? What are you going to cut? What can you stop doing? That's a really healthy conversation to have people, because actually asking staff and faculty, what can you stop doing? Frequently, you find out stuff that you would never have thought of as an administrator all on your own. And then how do you redeploy resources that you already have? Because you're not going to get we don't have new money coming or large amounts of new money coming, and the state's not giving us huge swaths of new money. And tuition is rising and it's creeping up very slowly. That will probably continue for the foreseeable future. So you need to think about, if you need to do something new, how are you going to pay for it? You cut something or you redeploy money. Many of our faculty and staff don't think about these kinds of things very much, and why would they? We never asked them to until quite recently. And so for many people, it's kind of a shock to the system. I had to think about it more, particularly when I got to the graduate school, because of having a 16% budget cut, which was truly devastating at the time. But it is important, I think, for the faculty and the staff to be involved. If you want to actually be part of academic excellence these days, you first of all need to know something about the finances of the place. And so if you're going to influence academic choices, if you're going to influence what we do as an institution, the quality of our work, how our faculty work, how our students learn, you've got to think about the finances. It's just, I think, it's inescapable. We need to think about linking all activity to budgets, all activity to cost, is my sense. And let me give you a couple of examples. When I was a department chair in the Department of Communication in the Seattle campus, we got permission from the college to hire a new faculty member. And so we'd go do a search and we'd find someone who was pretty wonderful. We'd actually work really hard to find 2 people who were really wonderful. And then I'd go back to the college and say, we really have to have 2. We have to have both of them. This is what you do as a department chair or any kind. We got to have more. I mean, and this doesn't have to be faculty, it could be staff. It doesn't mean these are people who are so good. And it never occurred to me that if you include benefits, maybe at today's rates or something like that, that second person was going to take $125,000 or more out of the system, or is going to be devoted to that person and not for something else for maybe a very long period of time, maybe for 30 years. I just wanted the position. I wasn't thinking about the money. Those are actually easy things to get into that. It's not bad, but the important thing is to recognize that there's a cost to that. And if you do a lot of that, you're not going to do some other things. The number of courses, and then how do you generate the money to actually pay for all of these kinds of things? I'm going to give you a couple of examples, just as examples, and so don't trust me on this one. I'm not sort of saying you have to do all these things, okay? I'm trying to give these as kind of examples. For instance, this is based on the Seattle campus, a 500 population class with 4 teaching assistants and a faculty member can net, after all expenses and overhead, $500,000 a year if all the students are paying tuition. Not all of them are, but you could net $500,000. Whereas a course with 20 students in it might only net $5,000, $10,000, because of, again, people paying tuition, if tuition is a major source of revenue. If you have course releases take people out of teaching. So if you have enough people who aren't teaching 500 population classes, you're foregoing all of that money. Imagine a campus with about 500 faculty members and an average course load of about 5 courses. If 50 people each have 1 course reduction for really important things that have to get done, that's equivalent of 10 faculty members. And so if you begin to think about this in these kinds of trade-offs, of course you give course releases. You can't run the place without course releases for our faculty. But you got to think about what's the cost of them. Not everybody should be teaching classes at 500. I've taught them. I know there are limitations. 20 is much better for almost anything you can think of, but maybe there are some instances when 500 is not bad. I know you don't have a room for it, but you know, but I'm talking about, so I'm not sort of saying everybody should teach 500 classes, nobody should get a course release, everyone should teach 10 classes a year, but all of those have financial implications on how we operate. A curriculum, a 75 credit major is much more expensive than a 50 credit major because there's more people who you need to have teaching and more time, okay? And then factor in the course releases, all that kind of stuff, and sabbaticals, all those things cost money. We have to do these things. This is part of the university. I mean, course releases, faculty need to decide the size of the curriculum. They need to decide how do you best deliver the discipline, the ideas, what skills need, the knowledge and the skills our students need. So I'm not arguing that 75 is inherently evil in any way and 50 is better. Would never do that. But recognize that faculty actually have a lot of control over some of the costs, and some of the biggest costs here is people, and curriculum drives the number of people that you need. So there is, all of us are very much, so this isn't just the administration who figures out costs. Everybody contributes to it as well. So again, I'm not saying big classes, no course releases, small majors at all, and that's actually why you want to have shared governance, because when you have to make these kinds of trade-off decisions, if you don't have faculty in the room, you're not going to be able to make sense out of what is, maybe in some disciplines, an introductory course of 100 people is not bad. You can do it. You know, this is hypothetical, okay? And that in some cases, you really need to have classes that have 10 people in them. So how do you do that kind of trade-off? I think the faculty, and it's going to maybe vary from discipline to discipline. Those of you in the staff, I think, come up across this every day, and so you're part of actually understanding how this broader ecosystem works as well. I think that the faculty, again, have unique insights, so they understand the academics of all of this. They know how to teach. They know how best to address the trade-offs that are academic in nature. But the staff also extraordinarily important because they have this wonderful organizational perspective. I think that one of the things that in a big place, and this is just alone, UWB is a big place compared to a lot of places around a lot of universities. So it's not just a little cog in the University of Washington. This is 5,000 students. This is a big place. Understanding how that organization works, and I've always think of, so if you push here, something's going to pop out over here. If you take money from here, you're not going to have it for over there. And I think the staff understand this as well too. So there's a possibility here, at least I've seen it in Seattle, and I'm sure it's true here, in which a kind of a sustained conversation about values and how things work. Because you can have great ideas about what you want to do, but if you can't get people enrolled in the place, it's not going to happen, okay? If you don't know how to do basic purchasing, in a lot of things you're going to have, it's just not going to work. So what can you do? to actually move all of this along. I think the most important thing is to become knowledgeable to the extent that you can. You don't have to be in the weeds of budgets, but you need, I think today, everybody who's at the university, faculty, students, and staff, need to understand the culture of scarcity and the environment in which we live. There's not unlimited amounts of money. Just because the place doesn't look like it's falling down doesn't mean that we have a lot of money. So understand scarcity, thinking about priorities. What are our priorities? Actually, in the last 20 years or so, I think that's actually been the thing I've learned most about how important it is to think about your priorities. And I'll come back to that when we'll get to a brief conversation about strategic planning. And then you can engage, you can advise. We've done a process at the University of Washington, Seattle campus, although it also involved 3 campuses, in which I asked all the deans and chancellors to work with their elected faculty councils in terms of thinking about things such as faculty salary policy, and how do we make these kinds of decisions. Engage the faculty to the point they can be partners. They can actually give advice. If you don't know anything about the finances, if you think that there's bags of money hidden in our desks, then you can't probably be a very good partner. But if you understand that money's finite and that we need to make some trade-offs, and that means a discussion about what our priorities are, you can play a very important role. This works well. I've had remarkable experience with the Senate Committee on Planning and Budgeting, which is the official advisory board to the Provost at the University of Washington, Seattle. Great advisors, really sometimes can get into the weeds, which is just great, getting advice at that level. But they understand issues around priorities. They understand issues around scarcity. And this kind of a system can work as long as there's mutual respect and that everybody agrees that we all are here because we value the mission of the university. From wherever you are in the university, doesn't matter whether you're faculty, staff, or student, we need to assume that everybody else actually has, their goal is, let's make sure this is a great place for all the people who work and study here. Maybe there's different ways you get there, and that's the conversation we need to have, but we shouldn't assume that people have bad intentions. And so if you assume people have bad intentions, you'll never get anything done. And that means you've got to have conversations going early. It's best to have conversations before you have a crisis. So that way your relationship is defined not by the crisis, but by the fact that you've talked to each other, you know each other. I don't mean you're best friends and you hang out all the time together, but that you actually have these ongoing conversations with your students, with your faculty, and your staff. And so a real engagement with faculty leadership and with staff leadership, I think, is really important because it becomes a vehicle for learning things, for administrators in particular. And then remember, it's not us versus them. I think one of the best parts of academic administration is that it's usually led, well, at not every university, but at the University of Washington, it is led by people who are faculty members. The president and I, the deans, are faculty members. And we believe very strongly, and I see it with people who are not faculty members, who are in other parts of the university, there's something that's really so important about having that kind of experience. So faculty and staff have real value to contribute, and I think having faculty in administration is extraordinarily important. So you're well on your way on some of these kinds of things, I think. So some of the stuff I've said to you, some people nodding, maybe you've heard it a million times. But on your RCM transition, I think that you are having to grapple with a lot of these things. And I just wanted to give you, based on our ABB implementation in Seattle since fiscal 12, I just want to give you just a few bits of advice. The first thing is, and this is how do you be successful and happy? One, be as transparent as you possibly can. Make everything clear to everybody as much as you can. And that means communication and more communication. You probably cannot communicate too much about how you're doing things. The second thing is to recognize that budget models are about where the money comes from and how you distribute it. It's not about creating new money. So there will not be new money because you adopt a new financing system. And so some people will have a bit less money and some will have more money. It's not because there is more money or that people are being taken, that there's less money across the board. It's got to do with how you've decided to allocate it. So Don't count on huge cash inflow. So manage expectations there. The third thing is recognize this is about the university. So don't do what I did as a department chair and only think about your own unit and sort of say anybody else has got more money than me should give it to me. So this is a university system, and that there are cross subsidies within institutions. Almost no one's paying for everything that they do. So how do we support one another? Obviously, the infrastructure units are being supported in many ways by tuition dollars, that kind of thing. So it's not just about you and your unit. It's about the university writ large. Watch closely for unintended consequences and address them quickly. Things always happen. Whenever you make a change of any kind, there's an unintended consequence, or 10 or 15 of them. Let me give you an example. I'm giving this example because it is so ludicrous. I hope you'll get it, and I mean it is ludicrous. Imagine that the business school decides they're going to start teaching Spanish because they want the revenue from the tuition dollars. And they're calling it Spanish for Business. Okay? You know? You got to stop stuff like that before it sees the light of day, because that's contrary to what you should be doing. It's not, you don't set up these things to have people rate each other and lots of students want to take Spanish, let's have that. This actually happened at Indiana University early in their first iteration at RCM. The business school began giving basically Berlitz-like classes in foreign languages, thinking that arts and sciences didn't need all the money. They'd get some of the student foreign language study. They had a foreign language requirement, so they'd do it. They didn't even dress it up as Spanish for Business. They just said, we'll teach Spanish right here. Now, it's usually not that blatant, and I use that example because it's so extreme, and I know people in business here, and they wouldn't do anything that stupid. But there's lots of other ways that you have, but watch it. I mean, just you need to, and have conversations. And maybe the best thing to do, if there really is a need for Spanish for Business, they ought to be doing it with the people who teach Spanish. That should be a combination. You can do these things together. It doesn't mean that nobody can talk about Spanish for Business, but why don't you think about how you might do that with other people, not just go hire a bunch of lecturers, because you don't probably have a lot of people in business right now who can teach Spanish, so you have to go find them. Okay, so again, a ludicrous example, but I think I want to give you a sense of how it can go. Have ongoing conversations and plan to revisit and monitor things as you go. We have sort of every 2-year cycle, deep discussions in the Seattle campus about how ABB is running, and we're gearing up for another big one in 2020. And we've made some changes, a series of changes, and I've just made a few more this spring about how we think about allocations. This, RCM, moves you thinking sort of a lot about your work and how the university operates. And going back to the issue, too, of setting priorities, I think that's what a broader strategic planning process is all about. And I think it's a really healthy thing to do for a couple of reasons. And I have a little bit of advice on that, too. Think about what you value. What's the most important thing to you? I think that's the real value of strategic planning is, what do you value? In your heart, in your soul, whatever. What's the most important thing for you? Us, the university, our students, our faculty, our staff. So values, vision, and mission. And then think about this in what we call an academic strategic business plan approach, which is, it's about academics, but it's also got to be fiscally sustainable. And because you can come up with this greatest plan on the face of the earth, but if you don't have enough money to actually do it, it's just going to be a complete waste of time. Include people broadly, get ideas. I think it's really valuable to spend a little bit of time up front to get ideas broadly. When we were doing the 2Y, 2D envisioning, the 2 years, 2 decades envisioning, 2009, 2010, we had about 400 people in focus groups, and then a broader set of focus groups in the second and third wave, and 3,000 people in all were engaged in sort of thinking about, what are our core values? What are we trying to accomplish over the next 20 years? What's important? So get ideas, give people voice, give people an opportunity to shape things, and then you get buy-in, because if you don't have any buy-in, it's not going to work. I mean, I could create a great strategic plan for you. It would be brilliant. And if I didn't include any of you in it, you'd never execute on it unless you liked parts of it, but most of it would just die. And be fast. I get something out here to you in a week. But, it'd be worthless. I'd grab about 10 people to help me get something together in a week, not all me. But it wouldn't be useful because you wouldn't feel it was yours. You would have no buy-in, you hadn't that opportunity. And also, you know your campus, you know your people. And so you alone can actually create that kind of document that's effective, that really works, both academically and fiscally. The other thing about strategic planning I think that's important is you identify what you will do, but you also identify what you won't do. I don't know how your experience has been, but people always have great ideas of things that you should do. You should try this. I actually know a bunch of people who always are suggesting that I try something. They never seem to actually do it themselves, but they've got great ideas for me. And you say, well, actually, that's kind of beyond what we're trying to do now. There's lots of cool ideas out there, but if you try to do all of them, you probably end up doing none of them. So what do you most value? What are you going to do? How are you going to spend your time and your money and your energy? And to me, that's what strategic plans are about. I don't think they have to be hugely elaborate. They should be flexible, that you revisit them. They're not just something you write down and put on a shelf. They have to have a kind of a living, they need to be living because you need to sort of be revisiting them. Because new stuff's going to happen, you're going to have to think about how to fit it in. So those are my major observations. I've got a few minutes for questions, because I need to be on a phone call before too long back in my office, but I'd like to, yes?
I was curious, you're located with a community college. Do you think there's anything we can learn from the community college model? Or one in particular that you might have been impressed with?
So I don't know very much about community colleges. My brother worked at one for 40 years, but I'm not, really an expert. My guess is you've already learned an awful lot about community colleges in your own transition here from a 2-year to a 4-year. So I guess I'd end up turning it back to say, so what have you noticed as you've gone through this kind of transition? Because you were only the junior-senior campus for a long time, and then you changed it to a 4-year about 8-9 years ago, 10 years ago? When was that? 10 years ago?
2006.
Yeah, okay, so 12 years ago. So what did you learn in that process? I think that for both the community colleges and for the University of Washington, generally, access is extraordinarily important. I mean, that's part of very deeply ingrained in the sense, our sense of our obligations as a public institution. But it's not enough just to get people here. You've got to actually provide them with a really good experience once they're there, that they're challenged, but they're also supported, so they can be successful, especially kids who are first in their family, who don't actually have large networks of people to tell them how to succeed at college. My father had never gone to college. He just always told me to study hard. Well, that's good advice, but there's more to it. You need a little bit more than study hard. Because I remember when I was finishing my dissertation, he said, why haven't got that done yet? It was kind of like, if you just really work on it, you get it done this week. But so I'm not terribly, I'm not much of an expert on community colleges, so I don't know if I actually came even close to answering your question.
The commonality between access and quality of education
Yeah.
does resonate.
Yeah. Yes?
Do you see a structure that would lead to the deans of the schools here at Bothell being on the same level, so to speak, as the deans at UW-Seattle?
I guess.
Because they're not now.
Yeah. Well, I guess my first question is why? Why would we want that? I'm not saying I don't want that.
It creates a good bit of confusion in terms of the code, in terms of how things are done, and questions about, who is the dean and who is not the dean. And the kind of question you would never get in Seattle, but that you get here. And so I'm going to ask a question, which is going to appear as pushing back, and maybe it is. So I know who the dean of interdisciplinary arts and sciences is here. Does he not have budget and academic authority? I mean, in what way would someone say, who's the dean of interdisciplinary arts and sciences? Or who's the dean of the business school?
I guess it's more about it's more about the status of the schools themselves. So forget the dean for a second.
Yeah.
The schools here are not at the same administrative level as the schools at UW Seattle. For example, administratively, this campus is treated as if it were a school or a college at UW Seattle.
Well,
And
so-
so where that matters is in promotion, tenure, that kind of thing, because we don't have school councils here that make recommendations.
So you have a choice to make collectively about, do you want to keep the campus-wide tenure and promotion committee, or do you want to have each school have its own? I wouldn't advise you to have both of them. We don't at Seattle, but so you're right, that is sort of a remnant of a smaller place when things were primarily programs. So again, I think, so if that's the key thing, you could, in consultation, if you decide this is the right thing to do here, you could institute P&T committees in every one of your schools and colleges. And then I think I would advise you, if you're doing that, spend some time talking to the non-departmentalized schools and colleges at Seattle. Because some of them, like the Evans School, have relatively few faculty, maybe 50 faculty at most, and they're not departmentalized. And so the people who are on the review committee, the preliminary, like in a tenure case, the people who sort of the 5 people or 3 people who are part of the review committee, and then the whole faculty vote, and then some of those people are also then on the internal committee for P&T, and so that has created its own dynamic of confusion.
There may be more issues than what I
Well, no,
I'm not a dean.
No,
so
but that's one of the ones that I hear most, and it seems to me that you want to make sure that you don't begin creating so many layers that you're just paralyzed, because then you'll say, well, this isn't fair, we have too many layers. And compared to Seattle, you guys have fewer layers, and so we should eliminate somebody, and I think maybe on tenure and promotion, that would be a critical one. That's where I've heard about it most.
It's the one that I've heard about.
Yeah. I think it's the one that's most pressing. You want to make sure, I think, that you have enough capacity within the schools and colleges to support that kind of thing. It's very time consuming. And also you have to have, and I don't have off the top of my head, a good number of everybody's faculty, but I know that at Tacoma, there's a couple of programs that we have not allowed to move to school or college status because we didn't think that they had the sustainable numbers of people. So you've got to have people in every rank. You need to have enough full professors to actually operate the place. So you need to have a school or college with enough full professors that they could actually have a meaningful process. So for 10 years, I was on what's called the Standing Committee for Women's Studies, Gender, Women, and Sexuality. I'm an adjunct in Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Washington, Seattle campus. They didn't have any had 2 full professors. They couldn't actually do much of anything. At one point, they only had 1. So about 10 of us who were adjuncts, or 8 of us who were adjuncts, who became part of their full professors. I was a full professor in that as an adjunct. So tenure, it came primarily in tenure and promotion and merit situations. Those are not ideal if you've got to go borrow people from other places, because I wasn't part of that department. I taught courses that were cross-listed with women's studies, but I didn't go to their faculty meetings. And so you kind of got people who are very sympathetic to the mission and supportive, but they're not part of it, and so I don't think they make the best decisions. So just make sure you got enough people there to actually be able to run the thing. If it's all assistant professors, you're not going to be able to do it. So, what else?
Online learning. How do you see this emerging role at the University of Washington? What's its impact? How could it benefit the external campuses that are space constrained?
Yeah, I think it actually could benefit all 3 campuses, because we're all 3, I think, space constrained. You guys are tighter than anybody else, but we're pretty tight at Seattle. Tacoma's got a little more room to go. I think of it as I come at it, obviously it can help with space constraints. I think its real value for me, in terms of I've thought about it over the last 10 years or so, is primarily the access component to it, and that we can then reach out. We can be teaching people who live in Yakima and who don't want to, who for a variety of reasons are more place-bound than people who live here, or they're not going to be able to drive over the mountains easily, or that for their family or for them moving here, either here or Seattle or Tacoma, isn't really quite possible. So I think of it primarily in terms of access. It could also, just in terms of flipping, just moving some stuff online, you can deal with a lot of space constraints if you suddenly have, and you can do lots of cool things. You can do synchronous and asynchronous kinds of learning, and so, which also then meets people when they want to be met, which I think is pretty important. A lot of our students, we know, do a lot of their studying between midnight and 4 a.m. And I don't think we should ask faculty to teach during midnight. Well, some faculty might want to do it, but so I think it's got tremendous capacity. You don't do it because it's cheaper, because it's not. It requires a great deal of upfront investment, but then continuing monitoring. And you really have to think, you need to do a lot of assessment about the student engagement there. And then how do you think about the student engagement piece? The libraries across the university have done a lot to try and add to that process. So it's not just me recording a bunch of lectures. How do you create an engaged classroom? So, I mean, this is stuff that if you know anything about online learning, you know. So I think it's not only is it a good idea, I think it's absolutely necessary that we get there. Meeting our students where they are, we began a report series in the Provost office 6 years ago about technology in the classroom, and tried to highlight people who are doing interesting things, some of them from this campus too, because our students live in this soup of new media and online and social media. And so how do we capitalize on what they're doing already to get their attention? So, yes?
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about deferred maintenance for the university. And I'm not thinking so much about...
Can we put that off?
That's my question. So I'm new to the university. I've only been here for a year and a half, so I don't really know the history.
Yeah.
And I'm not worried because I'm sure you've got a plan. And I'm not thinking necessarily just about Bothell, but as you talk about the culture of scarcity and us thinking 20 years out, it's important for us to have some sense. And when I hear about the deferred maintenance, I tend to hear that there's a lot of it and it's a big problem. And so I'm wondering if you could just speak to, do we see that we could, through budget maneuvers, fix this problem in the next 20 years so that we've caught up and we have better reserves? So can you just talk a little bit about that?
So we'll never catch up because you open the building and a week later there's some deferred maintenance. So deferred maintenance is a kind of a slippery term. Anything that hasn't been just done has got some deferred maintenance. And so there's a lot of so-called deferred maintenance that you can sort of say, that's good, that's okay. You don't have to paint your house every year. You wait 7 years or 10 years, and there's some deferred maintenance there. But so you can compute costs, and people have computed the cost as $1 billion for the university writ large, and that's a little staggering because who could possibly deal with that? I think that the plan is to chip away at it, and they're in facilities on the Seattle campus, and I'm not sure what you guys are doing here. There are plans to sort of focus on individual buildings and kind of, prioritize a building and then pull everybody together who's going to help on that building. So imagine that a building needs 5 or 6 different kinds of things. Rather than doing them piecemeal, do them all at once, get it done, and then move on to the next one. So this actually has the potential, this has been shown elsewhere in the country, of being a more efficient use of the staff, because you do everything at once. And if you're moving a whole bunch of stuff there for tools or whatever, you just do it all at once and everyone kind of works together. So I think we do have a plan to reduce the horrendous stuff, because we need to move beyond we're fixing this because it's leaking right now. That's a really bad. And on some deferred maintenance, if you don't do some, you don't want the projects to choose you, you want to pick the projects. And if things are really bad, they choose you. And at that point, it's really bad and it's really expensive. It's tricky. An example I'll give you, which is just to tell you that I've had to deal with this. So I'm in Gerberding Hall, which is an old building, 1949. Well, actually, it's not very old, is it? But by some building standards, it is. And Lord knows what is in the roof, but it doesn't. You can have a very, very small hole in your roof, and water will get in. And so for 5 months now, people have been trying to figure out why there's water, where the water is coming from that's coming into my office. And so I've had my office in sort of disarray since Christmas, and they got to get it figured out because a new person coming in July 1st. I hope they can get it fixed for him. So I'm not. It's challenging in this fiscal environment. It's not as bad as it sounds. There are some outliers that are incredibly bad. I think the School of Social Work on the Seattle campus has got some real problems in terms of mold. We got leaks in the roof of Gerberding. In some of the gargoyles are really pretty, but they're really bad because when they get old, they'll fall off. And so don't build. I mean, I'm being facetious. Don't build buildings with gargoyles on them. But we now are thinking, I think, about the long-term maintenance of buildings in different ways than we did a long time ago. We are saddled with some old buildings, like Gerberding or some of the stuff in the Central Quadrangle, University of Washington, all those gargoyles, and they literally do. And then we've gotten rid of. There's almost nothing that's unreinforced masonry on the Seattle campus. So we put a priority on the earthquake, and so I think we're pretty much where we need to be on that. So it's tough. I think we'll be okay. Good question. What else? I got time for one more. Yes?
So I'm really interested in implementing ABB for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's a particular challenge that you can share with us as the Seattle campus to implement ABB that might be instructive.
Well, the first big one was that it happened at the same time as budget cuts. And so most people know, without a doubt, that ABB is just going to destroy your budget. So it's just not fair. And then we created a hold harmless situation where we didn't want people to be whipsawed in the first year or two. So if your budget was a certain amount, you basically were going to be guaranteed to keep that budget. And it was a mixture of tuition dollars and what we call the supplement, which was everything else. So imagine College A has very few students, professional school, and lots of costs. So they might have a very large supplement and not a lot of tuition revenue, whereas arts and sciences might have a lot of tuition revenue and not a very large supplement, okay? Those things can't be thought of as frozen in place. And we have not changed, until this year, we hadn't changed the supplement. I've just set out a new policy on how we're going to think about the supplement differently. So don't let things freeze. Just, have a sense this is kind of rolling, and that you're going to try and prevent people from whipsaw. But this isn't, you've got to think about these things as dynamic systems, because the university is a dynamic system. Your campus is a dynamic system, and people kind of move here and there. So it's tricky, because you have faculty who are not moving from here to there as fast as the students might be moving. And we've seen this in arts and sciences at Seattle. I assume you've seen it here also. People moving out of the humanities and into STEM. You still have tenured faculty in humanities, and you still need to. And if you think about what matters, it's not just the numbers. It's also, this is part of our soul. I mean, if you don't do the humanities, what are you doing? You don't deserve to be called a university. Even Caltech does humanities, not a lot, but they do it, So those would be things I think I would call your attention to.
Thank you.
And, recognize it doesn't create money, but it's and then what it most discloses is the cross subsidies. Who's paying for a lot of things? Humanities and social sciences classes on the Seattle campus tend to be pretty large, especially in the social sciences. The 500 population class example I gave you, that's a lot of introductory courses in the social sciences that large. I'll put it this way. The last time we looked at this was about 7 years ago. We make money on every English major. They don't cost. We get $17,000 a year from the state between tuition, $17,000 a year per student, tuition and state subsidy. It doesn't cost $17,000, at least in 7 years ago, to do it. But you lose money on every engineering major, So how do you think about those cross subsidies? It's okay to have cross subsidies. They're not bad. English shouldn't get extra money because they're cheaper. And I'm using cheaper not in terms of quality, but you don't have, the salaries tend to be lower, which has got to do with the national sorts of things. You don't have $500,000 or $1 million setups and labs. So it varies in that regard. So, Ruth, anything that I should have mentioned that I didn't?
You did a great job.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, thank you very much.